So just a little bit of overview just on, the career as a whole. To write and illustrate. Where did that idea come about? Because that's kind of rare.
Well, I'm an illustrator. I always wanted to be a children's book illustrator since I was in kindergarten. And then when I went to go get a job, the way it works is the publisher puts the illustrator with the writer. Mm-hmm. Hi, Joe. And, okay, I lost my train of thought there. So they said, well, you're going to have to wait till we get a good match for you, but you should try writing it yourself. And I said, oh, I'm not a writer, I wouldn't be good at that. And they said, well, how are you at telling stories? I said, oh, yeah, I'm good at telling stories. Said, well, we can have, that's what we have editors for. Little did I know. So then I wrote my first story, and they liked it, and actually did not have borders, which is kind of my trademark. I don't know if you know my work.
Yes,
So
definitely.
I always put like little a frame around my picture, and then it tells about what's coming next, or it may be some information about the time and place that the book is set in, or sometimes there's a minor story going on that ties up at the end. So the first one I did, he said, well, look, we don't want any pretty little books, meaning it's children's literature, and in order for a child to be captivated, it has to have all the elements that you would expect from literature. It's going to have a strong plot, characters that motivate you, and shouldn't look like a greeting card. Mm-hmm. So the second one I did, I made the border have a part in the story, and he said, okay. And then ever since then, I've been writing my own. And plus, there's always that little concern about, am I portraying someone else's characters the way that they want them?
Sure.
So, in that way, I get to do the whole world.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, at this point, how many books has it been? It seems like a lot.
Oh, just, I'm not a counter.
Uh-huh.
I'm more of a live in the momenter.
Yeah.
And I think there's about 37 or 38.
Wow.
But on the website, it has a parade of books.
Okay, gotcha.
And so
Gotcha.
I guess I could count those, but everyone always asks, and I never get motivated enough to find out.
I mean, I feel like that's probably a good point.
I'm always thinking, what's the next book?
Mm-hmm.
So it's always that.
So speaking about this next book, I mean, you went on a trip to India, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely. It was a couple of years ago. And we went with this friend of ours who's a bird guide, and hoping to see a tiger, but they can't promise it because these tiger reserves are huge. They're like the size of Rhode Island, big. Mm-hmm. And many of them were hunting preserves in the olden days for the Maharajis, when that would be their pastime, is killing animals. Mm-hmm. So they left them pristine. This tract of land would be pristine, and it would be in Magnar Paresh, which is in the center highlands. So it wasn't near the Himalaya, but it was going in that direction. So it was a little bit chilly, and we did see a tiger. It was very exciting. I got to tell the kids about it, but it was. We were there for 3 days, and we had seen the birds, the mammals. I got fascinated. A little aside. I got fascinated with Mughal art. It's also called Persian miniatures or Indian court art, because at that time India didn't have the same boundaries. It was more towards the Middle East and north. Mm-hmm. It was this flourishing of the arts, and Mughal is spelled M-U-G-H-A-L. And it was 15th, 16th, 17th century, even into the 18th century. Mm-hmm. And there was like ateliers, studio workshops, where they brought artists in, and they would paint the flora, the fauna, and all the princes and stuff. Mm-hmm. They did these gorgeous clothes, and they were somewhat a set piece in that they would have certain gestures that the characters would make that would mean something, or plants that would show, or they'd always have like 2 little doves if they were people were lovey-dovey. Mm-hmm. So, and I always loved those when I went to museum school in Boston. So I tried to find the animals and birds and plants that I'd seen in those pictures. That was where I was going to set my story. So when colonial England came in, they brought a lot of trees and birds and things that they wanted to see, that we're familiar with. Mm-hmm. Even a lot of plants from Africa were imported into India because the climate is so conducive to growing things. So I wanted to go back in time, therefore could not have those plants. And so I used those as a guide, those little miniatures as a guide. My husband had been before and said, I would love it, and it was, did not disappoint. So that these parks are huge, and you go through farmland and just the area around the parks. It's as if it might have been 100 years ago. It was very rural and pleasing to look at, and the people all were friendly, and we didn't have much interaction, but you got a little view. But then in the parks, you'd have a ranger go with you. They didn't call them rangers, but the park representative would go with you. And you couldn't go in the park before 10 or after 3:30 because that's when the lions would be on the prowl.
Wow.
Because they're very fearsome predators. And they're huge. So we were there for 3 days, and then we heard the monkeys and the deer making their alarm call. And they're all facing in one direction. So then we looked in that direction, and then we heard this huge roar. And then the bushes got and then these huge males.
Wow.
They're giant. They're just huge. Oh. And he looked at us like we were dirt. We were thinking like, what is, look like a cat and go,
yeah.
But he was like, bothersome. And then he walked down the road.
Tourist.
Yeah. He walked down this sandy little path that the Jeep was on. And these are the mahouts. They're guys on elephants that are protecting from poachers.
Oh, that's awesome.
So they're armed, yeah. And these mahouts I found fascinating because as little boys, it kind of went down in the families as a lot of times things in India, like tin workers, will be taught by their parents. And so a trade could be in generations. And these mahouts, their parents probably, well, not the moms, but the dads, were mahouts. And they're matched up with an elephant when they're little boys. And then they stay with that same elephant their whole life. And then the Indian elephants are very tractable compared to African elephants. So they're used as work animals.
Okay.
But they're well cared for. And there's a very strong bond between the mahout and the elephant. And so they would go in twos, and they're armed. So they're almost like environmental police. So it is a sophisticated endeavor, but it looks exotic because of the elephants, but they can get through this woodland and go over rocks and stuff that there's no other way you could do it.
Way better than a Jeep.
Yeah. You couldn't do it with a Jeep.
And
elephants just crush.
For the story of the book itself, I mean, there's always some type of tale or moral behind it. Where did this idea come about? What is it? Okay. What's the purpose?
Well, it's really kind of convoluted, but I will tell you. I was reading a novel, and there was this little parable story in the novel. It was The Cutting for Stone by Abraham Velgeese. I don't know if you've heard of that book. It was a big seller about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So, it was also in Eaters of the Dead, which is the same little parable by Michael Crichton. You know him. He wrote Jurassic Park. And both those men put it in their novels because it's kind of a little bit symbolic. It's about this merchant. He's in Baghdad, and he's a bad sort of guy. And he always wears these slippers to kind of try to trick people into buying his stuff, feeling sorry for him, and that kind of thing. And he's a kind of reprehensible character. And he finally decides to get rid of the slippers, but every time he throws them away, they come back. And something hideous happens every time he throws them away. They hit an animal, and then it crashes into a marketplace, and people die, and stuff like that. So that part is not for children. So I decided to change the merchant into a tiger, which is much more fun to draw. That was the main reason.
Right.
And I made it into more of a funny kind of thing, so that nothing really bad happens. So as he starts out with this is an edition that I made, a young tiger in this beautiful palatial garden, and he's playing around with his friends, and the friends say, well, why do you have those slippers in this little building? It's almost like a little shrine. And then the father tells a story about how they came to be there. And the father grew up very poor, and there he is with his mother, and you can tell she's lame because she has a crutch. She's got a sewing business, and none of that is in words, it's just in the pictures. And his feet are bothering him because he's always going to do these chores. So she makes him a pair of slippers. And they not only protect their feet, but they kind of, in essence, guide him. And he finds this streak of clay in the riverbank and makes bricks from it, and thereby makes his fortune. And the first thing he does is he builds his mom a house, and then becomes very famous as an architect with these beautiful bricks from this special blend of clay. And gets married, and everyone looks at his slippers and says, oh, those are really grungy. They're not appropriate for a wedding. So he throws them away, and they go down the river stream and stop at the dam. That was the first way he tries to throw them away. And the elephant brings them back, and he's like, oh no. And he's got his, he's biting his paw because, remember I was telling about the Indian miniatures. Well, the Indian miniatures, if you're looking amazed, they always show a person biting their finger. Okay. Like, pinch me, am I dreaming? So that would be a way of representing a thought in the pictures. Because probably people were illiterate, a lot of people that were looking at them.
Okay.
And so I did it. I thought it was kind of neat.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that happens is, oh yeah, they're going to have an important visitor. And they say, oh, the slippers are not appropriate. He throws them over the wall. Behind the wall, he can't see it. There's a goat herd with all his goats going to the pastures. Hits the goat, and they go berserk and cause all kinds of havoc. The shepherd comes back with the slippers. Oh, how could you have done this? And then the third time, they have their little baby, and all the animals come to it would be like a christening, but they're not Christians. Just a welcome ceremony for the child. And the monkey says, oh, look at, great child, but look at those awful slippers. So again, this time he sends them airmail to his uncle far away in the village. And there's the pigeon taking them. And off they go to the village, but the uncle has a different take on them. He says, oh my gosh, these represent all this hard work that you've done, and look where you come from, and how good care you've taken of your mother, and these represent something really beautiful. And so the father's like, oh no, I still got these slippers. They may represent something beautiful, but I'm beyond the slippers now. And then that's when the tiger cub, and this is my favorite page, says, well, why don't you build a little shrine for them? And I hesitated to use the word shrine, a special building for them, so that we can look at them, remember our past, your past, but we can still admire all the wonderful deeds you have done. And so that's a happy ending. And so it's kind of symbolic if you wanted to think that way. And I think children do sort of absorb things, ideas like that, even though that they may not be able to put a name to them. About sometimes, like, you can't really control the things that happen to you, but you can put them in a place where they're not going to haunt you. But you can look at them and say, this is part of my life, but you can't throw it away and pretend it never happened.
And be grateful for the experiences.
Yeah, so it's kind of like being authentic to yourself. So that's what the story is. The original story does have that parallel to it, but I just changed it around. And interestingly enough, when I read about the different Mughal emperors, there's all kinds of children upsurging the fathers, and it just goes on, and it's very dramatic. But they did go to Baghdad. That was really part of their culture, this Persian culture, and the northern Indian culture was very lavish, and they loved these beautiful fabrics and jewels, and that was fun to draw.
Yeah. And it's just last question for me as far as the tour goes.
Sure.
Obviously, to promote, but at the same time, what is what are you going to go in here and do? What's kind of the purpose?
Okay. Well, I do something a little different. I do a little talk, like I've talked to you about the Mughal Empire and stuff like that, and do a drawing and make it like an art lesson, encouraging the children to use their creativity and tell them how unique they are. And that comes from my heart because I, feel that human beings have always done art. And now that the computer and the video game are very strongly loved, people use them as part of their extension of themselves. I don't want the books to go away, because I think that there's something about manipulating your hands when you're drawing, and it's just very human like, and so I encourage them to do drawing too.
That's awesome.